the virus that shouldn't exist. What if I told you there's a monster hiding in plain sight? A creature so alien that almost none of its DNA matches anything else on Earth. This isn't science fiction. This is a real virus that completely breaks all the rules of life we thought we knew. We all think we have a pretty good idea of what a virus is. It's that tiny, invisible germ that gives you a cold or the flu. In biology class, they teach us that viruses are simple, almost not even alive. They're like tiny pirates, way too small to be seen, with just one goal: find a living cell, hijack it, and make millions of copies of themselves. They are supposed to be small, simple, and completely dependent on others. But deep in the mud of ponds and at the bottom of the ocean, scientists have found something that throws all of that into the trash. They found a virus as big as a bacterium, with a genetic code larger than some complex living things. Its name is Pandora virus, and its existence opens a box of questions so profound they could change biology forever. We are about to go on a journey to understand this impossible virus. A journey that takes us to the very edge of what it means to be alive, and forces us to wonder if there's a whole secret world of biology we never knew existed. Part 1: The rules of the game. Before we can understand how Pandora virus breaks all the rules, we first need to understand what those rules are. Think about life as a huge, bustling city. In this city, you have all sorts of residents. You have the bacteria, which are like little one-room apartments. Simple, but they have everything they need to live on their own. They can find food, make energy, and build new copies of themselves. Then you have the more complex life, like plants and animals, and even tiny single-celled creatures like amoebas. These are like giant skyscrapers or whole neighborhoods. They have specialized rooms, power plants, factories, and a central library with all the instructions to keep the city running. That library is the nucleus, and the instruction book is their DNA. Now, where do viruses fit into this city? Viruses aren't residents. They are not even buildings. They are more like a single, mysterious message slipped under the door. They are incredibly, ridiculously small. If a single human cell was the size of a football stadium, a bacterium would be about the size of a person on the field. A virus in that same stadium would be the size of a football. They are tiny packages, usually just a little bit of genetic code, their instruction manual, wrapped up in a protective shell made. And here's the most important rule of all. A virus can't do anything on its own. That sticky note is useless if no one reads it. A virus can't eat, it can't grow, it can't move, and it certainly can't make copies of itself. It is the ultimate parasite. It's like a car with no engine. To do anything, it has to hijack a car that already works. It drifts around until it bumps into a living cell, one of those apartments or skyscrapers in our city of life. It then injects its little sticky note of instructions into the cell. Once inside, the virus's instructions are read by the cell's machinery. The cell gets confused. It stops doing its own work. It stops building things for itself and starts following the virus's commands. It becomes a zombie factory, forced to use all of its energy and resources to build thousands or even millions of new viruses. Once the new viruses are all assembled, they burst out of the cell, destroying it in the process, and head off to find new cells to hijack. This is the life of a virus. Small, simple, and completely dependent. For over a century, this was the undisputed definition. All viruses were like this. They had very few genes, sometimes as few as 4. They were tiny, and they were fundamentally different from cellular life. This was not a suggestion, it was a biological law. And then, something was found in a water cooling tower in England that started to crack the foundation of that law. Part 2. The First Giant. The story begins not with a bang, but with a puzzle. In 1992, in the city of Bradford, England, there was an outbreak of pneumonia. Scientists went to investigate, taking samples from the water in a cooling tower, a place where warm water and air create a perfect breeding ground for tiny organisms. They were looking for the bacteria causing the illness, and they found it. But they also found something else. Under the microscope, they saw what looked like a fairly large, dot-like bacterium inside an amoeba, a single-celled predator that gobbles up bacteria. They thought it was just another bacterium they hadn't seen before. They called it the Bradford coccus, and because they couldn't get it to grow in the lab like a normal bacterium, they mostly gave up on it. They put the sample in a freezer and, for the most part, forgot about it for nearly a decade. The sample eventually made its way to a lab in France, led by a scientist named Didier Raoult. His team was an expert in finding sneaky bacteria that hide inside other cells. In 2003, they decided to take another look at this frozen mystery. They managed to get it out of the amoeba and looked at it with a powerful electron microscope. What they saw was shocking. It didn't look like a bacterium at all. A bacterium is a simple bag of parts, but this thing had a distinct geometric shape. It was a perfect 20-sided die, an icosahedron, which is a classic shape for a virus. But that seemed impossible. This thing was enormous. It was bigger than some bacteria. You could see it with a regular light microscope, something that was absolutely unheard of for a virus. The team decided to analyze its genes. They cracked it open and read its genetic instructions. The scientific world was stunned. Many people refused to believe it was a virus at all. A virus that big, with that many genes? It broke all the rules. The definition of a virus was that it was small and simple. Mimivirus was huge and complex. Viruses weren't supposed to have genes for things like making the building blocks of proteins or repairing their own DNA. Mimivirus had them. It was as if someone had found a bicycle that had its own engine, air conditioning, and a GPS system. It was still a bicycle, but it had parts that no one thought a bicycle should have. The discovery of Mimivirus opened the floodgates. It told scientists that they had been blind to a huge part of the viral world. Because they were always looking for tiny things, they had been throwing away the giants without even realizing it. They had been using filters to get rid of bacteria and other big stuff to isolate the tiny viruses. But these giant viruses were so big, they were getting caught in the filters along with the bacteria. Scientists realized they had to start looking in a new way. They had to start looking for the bugs they had previously ignored inside amoebas. And when they did, they found something even more impossible than Mimivirus. They found a creature that would make Mimivirus look ordinary. Part 3, Pandora's Jar. The same team of French scientists who had worked on Mimivirus, led by Jean-Michel Claverie and Chantal Abergel, went on a global hunt. They figured that if one giant virus existed, others must too. They searched for them in the most ancient and simple hosts they could think of, amoebas. These single-celled organisms have been crawling through the mud and water for over 1 billion years, swallowing bacteria and other tiny things. In 2013, they hit the jackpot twice in 2 very different places on Earth. The first was in the sediment off the coast of Las Cruces, Chile. The second was in the mud at the bottom of a shallow freshwater pond near Melbourne, Australia. In both samples, hiding inside the local amoebas, they found a new type of giant. And this one made Mimivirus look small. Under the microscope, these new entities were colossal. They were not just a little bigger. They were shockingly bigger. They were a full micrometer long, easily visible with a standard light microscope. To put that in perspective, they were larger than some parasitic bacteria that can make us sick. Their shape was also completely different from any virus ever seen before. They weren't the typical 20-sided die shape of Mimivirus, or the weird lunar lander shape of viruses that infect bacteria. These new giants were shaped like an ancient Greek pot, an amphora. They were smooth, oval-shaped blobs with what looked like a little plug or cork at one end. They were so strange, so new, and they held so many potential secrets that the scientists decided to name them Pandoravirus, after the Greek myth of Pandora's box. The name was perfect because they knew that studying this virus would unleash a torrent of new questions that would challenge the very foundations of biology. ... Just how big is a Pandora virus? Let's try to get a sense of the scale. Imagine a tiny HIV virus is the size of a single person. On that scale, the common cold virus would be about the same size, maybe a little smaller. A small bacterium would be the size of a car. Mimivirus, the first giant they found, would be the size of a bus. Pandora virus would be the size of a jumbo jet. It's a completely different class of being. It lives in the microscopic world, but it is a titan of that world. This size alone was enough to cause a major stir in the scientific community. Biologists had a neat dividing line. Things below a certain size, which couldn't make their own energy or proteins, were viruses. Things above that size, which could, were cells, like bacteria. Pandora virus stomped all over that line. It was as big as a cell, but as they would soon find out, it behaved like a virus. It was a paradox, a contradiction in a tiny, pot-shaped package. But the real shock came when they did what they did with Mimivirus. Part 4. The Alien Library. Inside every living thing, there is a book of instructions. This book is called the genome, and it's written in a chemical language with 4 letters: A, T, C, and G. The sequence of these letters tells the cell what to build and what to do. The human genome, our complete instruction book, is about 3 billion letters long. It's a massive library with thousands of chapters, which we call genes. A simple bacterium like E. coli that lives in your gut has a much smaller book, about 4 million letters long. Now let's look at the viruses we knew. The flu virus has a tiny pamphlet with about 13,000 letters and just 13 genes. HIV is even smaller, with about 10,000 letters and 9 genes. They are incredibly efficient. They only have the absolute bare minimum instructions they need to survive. This was a core part of being a virus: genetic simplicity. When they sequenced Mimivirus, they were stunned to find its book was 1.2 million letters long, with over 900 genes. This was already a rule breaker. Then came Pandora virus. When the scientists in France sequenced the genome of the Pandora virus from the pond in Australia, they found its instruction book was 2.5 million letters long. The one from the coast of Chile was slightly smaller, at 1.9 million letters. This was double the size of Mimivirus. Pandora virus had a genome containing up to 2,500 genes. This is more genes than some simple eukaryotes, organisms with complex cells, like parasitic fungi. A virus had more genes than a complex living organism. This was unheard of. It was like finding out that the instruction manual for a toaster was longer and more complicated than the blueprints for a skyscraper. But the sheer size wasn't even the weirdest part. The truly mind-bending discovery came when they started to read the genes. In biology, when you find a new gene, you can usually figure out what it does by comparing it to all the other genes we already know about from other creatures. If you find a gene in a new species of fish that looks a lot like a gene for making fins in a salmon, you can be pretty sure that your new gene also has something to do with making fins. We can do this because all life on Earth is related. We all share a common ancestor, so we all share some of the same basic genetic heritage. It's like how different languages might share common root words. So the scientists took the 2,500 genes of Pandora virus and compared them to the massive global database of every gene ever sequenced from every plant, animal, fungus, bacterium, and virus known to science. They expected to find connections. They expected to see that Pandora virus had maybe stolen some genes from its amoeba host, or that it shared genes with other viruses. They found almost nothing. Point. It was a genetic dead end of its 2,500 genes. A staggering 93% were complete orphans. They had no recognizable relatives anywhere in the known biological world. It was like discovering a lost tribe in the Amazon and finding that their language was not related to any other human language on the planet. It was like opening a 1,000-page book and finding that 930 of those pages were written in a completely alien alphabet that no one had ever seen. What were these genes? What did they do? And most importantly, where did they come from? This discovery was the central, terrifying mystery of Pandora virus. This wasn't just a big virus. This was an alien on a genetic level. It contained a massive library of biological information that was, for all intents and purposes, new to science. It still had the basic features of a virus. It completely lacked the genes for making its own energy, and it didn't have the genes for building a ribosome, the little protein-making factory that all cellular life has. Without these, it was still helpless on its own. It still had to hijack an amoeba to do anything. It was definitely a virus, but it was unlike any other virus. It was a giant, carrying an encyclopedia of unknown biological functions. The next question was obvious. How does this thing actually work? How does this monster come to life? Part 5. The Zombie Factory. To understand how a Pandora virus reproduces, we have to follow it on its hunt. The virus itself is just an inert, lifeless particle, a pot full of potential. It drifts through the water, waiting. Its prey and its key to life is a single-celled organism like an amoeba. An amoeba is a blob of life, a microscopic predator that crawls around, eating bacteria and other small particles. To an amoeba, the giant Pandora virus at a full micrometer in length. Looks like a perfect, nutritious meal. It's like a big, juicy steak. Dot. Dot. Inseparable. It's like a big, juicy steak. It's like a big, juicy steak. It's like a big, juicy steak. There is one thing. It's probably got everything there. A big blot. The amoeba approaches the Pandora virus, and using a process called phagocytosis, it engulfs it. It wraps its fluid body around the virus particle and pulls it inside into a little bubble or stomach called a vacuole. The amoeba thinks it has just scored a great lunch. This is the biggest mistake of its life. Inside the vacuole, the amoeba starts to flood the area with acids and enzymes, trying to digest what it just ate. But the Pandora virus has a tough outer shell. It's built to withstand this, and now, triggered by the conditions inside the cell, the virus awakens. The little plug or cork at the top of its amphora-shaped body opens up. The alien instruction book is now loose inside the cell. The virus's DNA and proteins make their way to the amoeba's nucleus, the cell's command center. And here, the takeover begins. The virus doesn't just start making copies of itself everywhere. It does something much more sophisticated. It completely reorganizes the entire cell. The amoeba's own nucleus begins to break down and disappear. All of its own genetic material is destroyed. The cell's identity is erased. Then, the virus begins to build its own structure, a virus factory. It uses the raw materials from the now dissolved nucleus and other parts of the cell to construct a brand new, membrane-bound compartment inside the amoeba. This factory is the new command center. It is where all the viral replication will happen. The amoeba is no longer an amoeba. It is now a zombie, a mindless machine whose only purpose is to serve its new master. Inside the virus factory, the Pandora virus's 2.5 million letter genome is read by the amoeba's hijacked machinery. The cell's ribosomes, its protein-making machines, are forced to read the alien genetic code and start churning out viral proteins. The amoeba's enzymes are forced to copy the massive viral DNA over and over again. Slowly, within the factory, new Pandora virus particles begin to assemble. The proteins form. This process goes on for about 10 to 15 hours. The amoeba swells as it becomes filled with hundreds of new, fully formed Pandora viruses. It is no longer a living cell. It is just a container, a womb for monsters. Finally, the cell can't take it anymore. The amoeba's outer membrane ruptures, and the cell bursts open in an act of violent death. hundreds of new Pandoraviruses spill out into the water, ready to be eaten by other unsuspecting amoebas and start the cycle all over again. This complex factory-based replication is far more advanced than what a simple virus does. It's another clue that Pandoravirus is something special. But it doesn't answer the biggest question of all, the question that stumps everyone. Where on earth did this thing come from? Part 6. The 3 Mysteries of Origin. The existence of a creature like Pandoravirus, with its giant size and its vast library of alien genes, presents scientists with one of the greatest biological detective stories of all time. Where did it come from? There are 3 main theories, and each one is more mind-boggling than the last. Each one would force us to rewrite the textbooks. Theory 1. The Fallen Kingdom. The first theory is perhaps the most intuitive. It's called the reduction hypothesis. This theory suggests that Pandoraviruses are not viruses that got more complex. Instead, they are the last descendants of a life form that used to be a full living cell, but became simpler over time. The idea is that long, long ago, there wasn't just 3 main branches on the tree of life: bacteria, archaea, and eukaryotes like us. Maybe there was a 4th branch, a 4th domain of life, made up of a type of cell that no longer exists in its free-living form. The story would go something like this. One of these ancient, free-living cells started living as a parasite inside another cell. Life as a parasite is easy. You don't need to find your own food. You don't need to build your own power plant. Your host does all that for you. So, over millions and millions of years of this lazy lifestyle, this 4th type of cell started losing things. It was like moving into a fully furnished apartment with a personal chef. You'd eventually sell your own stove and get rid of your own furniture because you don't need it anymore. This ancient cell shed the genes for making its own energy. It shed the genes for building its own ribosomes. It lost more and more of its parts until all that was left was the bare minimum it needed to survive as a parasite. What's the evidence for this? The sheer complexity of Pandoravirus. It's hard to imagine how a simple virus could evolve 2,500 genes from scratch. It's easier to imagine a complex cell losing genes it no longer needs. The virus factory it builds inside the amoeba also looks a bit like a stripped-down cell nucleus. Another hint of its possibly cellular past. But there's a huge problem with this theory. If Pandoravirus is the remnant of a lost domain of cellular life, why are 93% of its genes complete orphans? If it evolved from a cell that shared a common ancestor with all other life, we should see strong connections in its genes to other branches of the tree of life. We should find ancient, conserved genes that are shared with bacteria or eukaryotes. But we don't. We find an alien genome. This theory struggles to explain where all those unique, unknown genes came from. It's like finding the ruins of an ancient Roman villa, but finding that all the books inside are written in a language that has no connection to Latin or any other known language. It doesn't quite add up. But Theory 2, the Great Escape. The second theory flips the first one on its head. It's called the accretion or escape hypothesis. This theory proposes that Pandora viruses started out as very simple viruses, or maybe even just a rogue piece of genetic material, and became more complex over time. This is the story of a thief who slowly becomes a king. It would start with a small, simple virus infecting a host cell. Every now and then, during the messy process of replication, the virus might accidentally pick up a piece of the host's DNA and incorporate it into its own genome. It's like a robber who not only steals the jewels, but also accidentally grabs the homeowner's car keys. Over countless infections in countless different hosts, over billions of years, the virus could have slowly accumulated genes. It would have stolen genes from bacteria, from amoebas, from all sorts of creatures it infected. It would be a genetic scrapbook, a mosaic of borrowed parts from all over the tree of life. Its genome would have grown larger and larger, and it would have evolved more and more complex functions. But it isn't. Its genes are overwhelmingly unique. It's like a thief who has a house full of priceless art, but none of the art can be traced back to any museum or private collection on Earth. Where did it all come from? This theory can't explain the profound alien nature of the Pandora virus genome. Theory 3, the Ancient Ones. This brings us to the third, and by far the most radical and exciting theory. It is sometimes called the virus first hypothesis. This theory suggests that Pandora viruses are not descended from cells, and they didn't build themselves up from pieces of cells. This theory proposes that they are something else entirely. They are relics from a time before the life we know today even existed. They are echoes from the dawn of life itself. The story goes like this. About 4 billion years ago, Earth was a primordial soup of chemicals. There were no cells. Life was just beginning to get started. In this prebiotic world, different systems of self-replicating molecules were competing. Many scientists believe that all cellular life we see today, bacteria, archaea, and eukaryotes, all descended from one single successful type of cell, which we call the last universal common ancestor, or LUCA. But what if LUCA wasn't the only experiment that life ran? This theory proposes that viruses or virus-like entities formed in that primordial soup as a completely separate origin of life. They were never cells. They were always just packages of genetic information. They wouldn't share a history with cellular life, which would explain why their genes are so alien. They come from a different tree of life altogether, one that has been running in parallel to our own for billions of years, hidden away inside other cells. This is a mind-blowing idea. It suggests that the story of life on Earth is not a single story, but at least two. It would mean that Pandora viruses are like living fossils from a lost world, a biological time capsule that could give us clues about what life was like before cells, as we know them, even existed. It could explain the mystery of the orphan genes. They aren't orphans at all. Their family is just so ancient and so different from our own that we can't recognize them. Right now, we don't know which of these theories is correct. Pandora virus remains a profound mystery. It truly is Pandora's box. Once opened, it changed the way we see the world. And it turns out, it's not alone. Part 7, A World of Giants. The discovery of Mimivirus and then Pandora virus was like discovering a new continent. Suddenly, scientists knew there was a whole new world to explore, and they started finding more and more of these behemoths. It turns out there is an entire family of giant viruses, officially called the nucleocytoplasmic large DNA viruses, or NCLDVs for short. In 2014, another team in France found something even bigger in physical size. Frozen in 30,000-year-old Siberian permafrost, they named it Pythovirus sibericum. Pythos is Greek for a large storage jar, similar to an amphora. This ancient virus was about 1.5 micrometers long, making it the largest virus particle ever found. When they thawed it out and exposed it to amoebas in the lab, it woke up and started replicating, perfectly preserved after 30,000 years in a deep freeze. Terrifyingly, despite its enormous size, its genome was actually much smaller and simpler than Pandora virus, with only about 500 genes. This showed that there was no simple relationship between size and complexity in this strange new world. Then they found Mollivirus sibericum, another ancient virus from the same. When they thawed it out and exposed it to amoebas in the lab, it woke up and started replicating, perfectly preserved after 30,000 years in a deep freeze. Terrifyingly, despite its enormous size, its genome was actually much smaller and simpler than Pandora virus, with only about 500 genes. This showed that there was no simple relationship between size and complexity in this strange new world. Then they found Mollivirus sibericum, another ancient virus from the same permafrost sample. This one was more spherical and had a slightly larger genome than Pythovirus. They found Marseille virus, named after the city in France, which has a genome that looks like a mishmash of genes from all 3 domains of life. They found Cafeteria rowenbergensis virus, which infects tiny marine plankton and may play a huge role in ocean ecosystems by controlling plankton blooms. This growing family of giants proves that Pandora virus wasn't just a one-off freak of nature. It's part of a vast, ancient, and incredibly diverse group of viruses that we are only just beginning to understand. They are everywhere, in the oceans, in the soil, in ancient ice. For all of history, we've been surrounded by these giants, and we never even knew they were there. Their discovery has huge implications. As the Arctic permafrost melts due to climate change, there is a real, though probably small, we're talking about a library of biological inventions that has been evolving for potentially billions of years, completely separate from our own. But the biggest implication of all is what it does to our understanding of life itself. The line between a living cell and a non-living virus was once bright and clear. Giant viruses have blurred that line into a fuzzy gray area. They are as big as cells and as complex as cells, but they have the lifestyle of a virus. They force us to ask the most fundamental question: what does it even mean to be alive? Pandora virus doesn't give us an easy answer. Instead, it tells us that life might not be a simple yes or no question. It might be a spectrum, a continuum, with strange and wonderful things living in the space between. It shows us that after centuries of exploring our planet, there are still monsters in the mud, and there's a whole universe of biology out there that we are just starting to peek into. These giant viruses are the messengers from that hidden world, and they have a clear message for us. You have no idea what's really out there. The Book of Life is longer and stranger than anyone ever dreamed. And if you want to explore another biological mystery that breaks all the rules, click the video on your screen now.